in association with Brookdale Lunch and Meat.
Ready?
Today I'm going to review the Bill of Rights. I'm going to get a little bit more in depth, and I want you to write down some of the key things I talk about as I go through each of the 10 amendments. I'm also going to bring in some of the court cases you've already looked at through those videos. But I think this will kind of bring all this together. There's some important clauses in the Bill of Rights. So I want you to get this down, add this to your notes, and hopefully this kind of gives you a better picture of the Bill of Rights by bringing the court cases into it as well. Okay, the First Amendment, the first sentence says, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion. I want you to write down that is the Establishment Clause. Okay, so the Establishment Clause is the fact that Congress cannot establish a national religion. All right. We've seen a affirmation of it in the Engel versus Vitale case. I know he called it Vital in his video, but it's Vitale. I've listened to the oral arguments. So in Engel versus Vitale, you see that compulsory prayer in New York gets struck down. It gets struck down by the Establishment Clause in the First Amendment. All right. Next up, you get or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. That is the free exercise clause of the First Amendment right here. So prohibiting the free exercise thereof, that's the free exercise clause of the First Amendment. What's your court case? Your court case there is going to be Wisconsin versus Yoder, right? So the Amish wanted to keep their kids at home past a certain age. I think it was 13, right? And then Wisconsin basically says, no, you can't do that. Kids got to go to school. You get this lands in the Supreme Court. Supreme Court's going to side with Yoder using that free exercise clause and say that, at age 13, really the question is, when does somebody's free exercise clause outweigh a state's education interests? And they're going to say, in this case, the free exercise clause outweighs the state's interest because of the age of the kids and because of the law-abiding nature of the Amish. Therefore, you get a bolstering of the free exercise clause there. You get an affirmation of it. Okay, or the right of the people to peaceably to assemble. This helps kind of create and foster interest groups and to petition the government for a redress of grievances, interest groups as well. Free speech, and then freedom of the press. Your free press case is New York Times versus United States, right? So you get those leaked Pentagon papers that looked bad on the government during Vietnam. Nixon orders the press to stop publishing the Pentagon papers, and then the Supreme Court rules though that freedom of press, that is absolute. Okay, so the freedom of the press is absolute. Okay, Second Amendment, a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state. The right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Okay, this is important because this is that McDonald versus Chicago case, which you guys got into week before last. Understand this about that case. That is a selective incorporation case. All right, so Chicago banned handguns. And McDonald sues and says this violates the Second Amendment. All right. And one of the questions is, okay, does that violate the Second Amendment? But the other is, does the Second Amendment apply to the states? And they're going to use that 14th Amendment due process clause and say a basic liberty is the right to keep and bear arms. That has been around in the United States since day one. So states, you now have to recognize the Second Amendment. Okay, Third Amendment. This is your basically reaction to the Quartering Act. No soldier shall in time of peace be quartered in any house without the consent of the owner. Not really all that super important, except when a little bit later this week we get to Roe versus Wade. Some people suggest that this includes a right to privacy. So the fact that the government cannot quarter people in our homes without our consent suggests a right to privacy. So the Third Amendment is important in that regard. Okay, the Fourth Amendment is really important, and I usually spend a couple days in class on this. I actually get into a court case that is not required, that is actually really interesting. But being that we're under these circumstances we are, I couldn't do that. Okay, the right of the people to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects against unreasonable searches and seizures shall not be violated, and no warrants shall issue but upon probable cause supported by oath or affirmation, and particularly describing the place to be searched and the persons or things to be seized. Okay, this is one of those. It's protecting the rights of the accused. It also helps set up this idea of you're innocent until proven guilty in the United States. So the government cannot just arbitrarily come in and search your house just because they don't like the way you look or something like that. All right. There has got to be probable cause. There has got to be a warrant issued by a judge to do that. All right. Something really important about the Fourth Amendment. If the government obtains evidence against you illegally, meaning they had no probable cause and they had no warrant, it cannot be used against you in a court of law. All right. So there's a court case. It's Kylo versus United States, and basically what had happened was a guy in Oregon had been growing marijuana plants in his house. The only reason the police were able to get any kind of ascertain whether or not this guy was doing that was they were using an infrared technology to capture heat signatures coming off the house. And the question in that case was, is that scan by that technology already violating the Fourth Amendment, being that that's not something that in other words, do they need a warrant to be able to do that? And the courts ruled that, that the law enforcement does. Therefore, this guy in Oregon actually got off from that illegal activity because that evidence was obtained against him illegally. That is called the exclusionary rule. I want you to write that down. Exclusionary rule. All right, and what that means is if evidence is obtained against you illegally, in other words, your Fourth Amendment rights are violated, then it cannot be used against you in a court of law. The Fourth Amendment is another amendment that's been incorporated to this states through the selective incorporation process. Okay, so there was a particular court case where the Fourth Amendment gets incorporated to the states. You don't need to know that particular court case, but just understand that there's this exclusionary rule that says if evidence is obtained against you illegally, cannot be used against you in a court of law. All right. Okay. Fifth Amendment, kind of the key. I'm not going to get into all this. One of the key things is this idea of twice put in jeopardy of life or limb. So this is double jeopardy. You can't be tried for the same crime twice unless new evidence emerges. So this is this idea of double jeopardy. There's also you get a due process clause here. So basically, the federal government cannot deprive you of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. That's different from the 14th Amendment. The 14th Amendment says states can't deny you life, liberty, or property without due process of law. The Fifth Amendment, being that originally the Bill of Rights just applied to the federal government, they're basically is talking to the federal government, saying the federal government cannot deny you life, liberty, or property without due process of law, and that your private property cannot be taken for public use. This is known as eminent domain. Okay, eminent domain. That your property can't be taken unless you are compensated for it. Okay. Your Miranda warnings. So when police are accusing you of a crime, they're going to arrest you. Part of what they're telling you is your Fifth Amendment rights, and part of what they're telling you is your Sixth Amendment rights. The key thing about the Sixth Amendment, okay, you have the right to a speedy and public trial. All right, so the police tell you that in your Miranda warnings. Okay. And the other key piece of this is that you have the assistance of counsel for defense. So in other words, if If you cannot afford an attorney, one will be appointed to you. That's that Sixth Amendment. This is another amendment that is going to get applied to the states through the selective incorporation process. That is a case you need to know. We're going to get to that tomorrow. It's called Gideon versus Wainwright. Okay. Amendment 7, not going to worry about it. It's not going to show up on the test. It's just more about the courts. Basically, if you get a trial that is a civil trial where it's not that there's been any criminal act, but people are basically just suing each other, that there is a right to a jury in that instance. Amendment 8, all right, excessive bail shall not be required, nor excessive fines imposed, nor cruel and unusual punishments inflicted. We've already gone over this, but I want you to understand, I want you to know this, that the Supreme Court ruled that the death penalty for a couple of years in the 1970s was cruel and unusual punishment, so it was illegal there for a hot minute in the 1970s. They reversed that precedent. They reversed that ruling later on. Okay, so that's why you do see the death penalty exist in states like Georgia, but it does not exist in states like Massachusetts. Amendment 9 is just simply saying this is not going to be important for testing purposes. Amendment 9, just because you have these rights we're listing doesn't mean you don't have other rights. And then Amendment 10 is not really getting into civil liberties at all. Amendment 10 is just simply setting up federalism. You know that, right? Those powers not given to the federal government are reserved to the states and the people. So the key amendments to know, okay, for this thing on May 11th when we go into this test. Amendment 1, super important, all right? A lot of court cases there, right? Wisconsin versus Yoder, New York Times versus United States, Engel versus Vitale, Schenck versus United States, Tinker v. Des Moines. There's a lot with that First Amendment. Amendment 2, right? McDonald versus Chicago. Amendment 3 is going to be kind of important when it comes to Roe v. Wade. Amendment 4, right? We have some of the rights of the accused there. We don't have a court case, but, there you go. Amendment 5, I'll talk about a little bit more as we get into Miranda versus Arizona, as I will with Amendment 6. Amendment 6 is going to be important for Gideon versus Wainwright. Amendment 7, not really important. Amendment 8, I just kind of want you to know that about the death penalty. It's around it was not around for a little while, and then it comes back. All right. Amendment 9, not going to be important for the test. Amendment 10 will be important for the test. All right. So that's going to be it for today. I want you to, hopefully you've summarized some of that in your notes, what I said, some of that key stuff in the First Amendment, that exclusionary rule in the Fourth Amendment. And then I will be getting into this more as we get into the court cases more.